What do three 21st century geeks have in common with three 19th century politicians? Well, the three geeks were three bosses. Mine, in fact. I've had numerous bosses over the years. None, fortunately for me, were bad, so I've been luckier than most. Almost everyone has an evil boss story. But three really stand out for me. Their names were Kevin, Mike, and Justin. The three 19th century politicians were Prince Clemens von Metternich, Otto von Bismarck, and Lord Salisbury of Austria, Germany, and England, respectively. What do they all have in common? They were all masters of inaction. Kevin and Mike were lead engineers. They had their own techie work to do, but they were also responsible for setting my tasks and priorities and being available to answer any questions that I had. Justin was, and still is, a sales guy and director. He'd give me a contract, tell me where and when to show up, who to see, and that's all those guys did. That's all they had to do. There was no hovering over me to see if I was doing it their way, no micromanagement, no demand that I check in every day. Their egos were parked at the door. There was no constant chit-chat, no verbal fencing to establish dominance and keep you pegged. They left me onto it. They left me to do it. I got on with the job. It was just assumed that I was cracking on, which I was, and everything was going to plan unless they heard from me otherwise. I might cross paths with Kevin or Mike on the way to get a coffee. Justin might drop by to see me if he was in the office to meet someone else, but then just as often he wouldn't. And I'd see him across the room during the day and find out later that he'd already left. Trust. Inaction. If a significant problem would arise, threatening success of the project, I have no doubt that they got involved to reset and restabilize, etc., etc. But the interesting thing is, I don't remember any such problems. There must have been some. Or maybe there weren't. Action and inaction, are both contagious. The more activity there is, the more activity gets generated. And it becomes a nasty spiral. And most of it will be useless or counterproductive action. Inaction, conversely, is not the absence of action. It's just the restriction of action to just the right moves, only the right moves. The rest of the time, you're thinking, observing, reflecting. You're not contemplating your next move. Rather, you're contemplating whether another move is necessary at all. And then, only then, what should that move be? Defending the status quo until a definitely better status quo can be identified. That's what you're doing. Not because change is evil, but because most changes are. Most changes end up being counterproductive. A lot of government policies, for example, end up achieving the opposite of the intended effect. Someone told me recently that Beijing is on its way to having more cars than people. And the reason? To combat the terrible air pollution in Beijing, the authorities imposed a policy designed to halve the traffic on the roads. All cars were labeled as even or odd. On Monday, the even cars were allowed to go to work. On Tuesday, the odd ones were allowed to go to work, and so on. In this way, they hoped they could induce people to work from home half the time. The result was, however, that people just bought a second car. Now they've got an even car and an odd car. And the traffic problems are no worse, and the pollution problems are no worse, but there's a whole lot more cars, and I imagine also a whole lot more parking difficulties. Beijing would have been better off without the action. The three 19th century politicians I mentioned had one thing in common besides being masters of inaction, and that is they all hated war. In fact, that's why they were masters of inaction. Metternich's system, which was a policy of frequent international congresses between the major European nations, was motivated by his conviction that countries that talk with each other are less likely to fight. Bismarck's political career was starting just as Metternich's was ending. He started 2 wars, but acted to end them quickly, and then famously said, "Anyone who has ever looked into the glazed eyes of a soldier dying on the battlefield will think hard before starting a war." Go figure. Once he unified Germany, peace was his objective. And Salisbury in England was his contemporary and cooperated with him. Salisbury insisted on being his own foreign secretary. He resisted allying Britain to any other European power that might be seen as a threat by another European power. All three of these guys recognized that violence is the default setting of the human race, and avoiding it needed to be their top imperative. Violence, of course, is action, and it almost always comes in response to action. The right policy then for them, and I wish it was for more, was to make inaction the default. And it's pretty telling that when these three guys were at the helm, war in Europe was pretty rare. So, why aren't you and I masters of inaction? That, detective, is the right question. Nobody's going to pay me for doing anything, are they? Gee, I guess I'd better do something. Anything, and fast. Anything must be better than nothing. And that's the mistake. Anything isn't better than nothing. Well, what is better than nothing then? The right thing. And the problem is the right thing rarely jumps out from behind a bush and announces itself to me just when I need it. You have to figure it out. You have to think. And thinking is hard work. And then quite probably you're going to have to start with something. And something isn't anything, which you quickly stop when you realize it's the wrong thing or not as good as a slightly better thing. And the key word there is actually stop, because you're replacing, not adding. This is sort of split testing your way through life. And then you replace the slightly better thing with an even better thing, and again until you reach the best or the right thing. You're thinking all the way through this. Richard Koch has got a great line that I keep telling myself. Action drives out thought. You got to make space to think. And I don't think this need to think is the only reason we aren't typically masters of inaction. Quite often it's just plain old insecurity. We don't trust our own judgment. We don't trust the people around us either. It's a dog-eat-dog, zero-sum world, don't you know? If I keep myself busy with anything, and if I keep you busy with it too, then the right thing must be in there somewhere, right? Yeah, don't count on it. And why don't we have more masters of inaction in business and in politics? Simple. In a modern democratic world, it's pretty hard to win over an electorate with a policy of doing little or nothing. People vote for the candidate who's going to do something and get the world revolving around me for a change. Politicians who say, "Gee, I'm sorry you're in a mess, terrible shame and all that, but I'm not going to fix it." They don't usually get my vote. But maybe they should. The government I want is not actually the one I need. So when election time rolls around, don't vote for the candidate you hate least, which is what you usually do. Don't vote for the one who's going to set the world to rights. Vote for the one who's least likely to do anything, but is quite likely to do the right thing.